format. Now, my topic is China, Russia. And I will start with a very short introduction, namely that on 24th February, Russian President Vladimir Putin decided to launch an all-out war against Ukraine from various directions. This military invasion followed Russia's annexation of Crimea and its direct support for separatist activities in eastern Ukraine, and marked a new chapter in Moscow's geopolitical approach. Even more remarkable was China's response and its overt diplomatic, financial, and economic support for Russia. So my main question is, of course, what are the counters of this new geopolitical formation, which I called the Dragonbear in 2015, following the first invasion of Ukraine. And of course, if this geopolitical formation is about to emerge, what are, in fact, Putin's geopolitical choices? Against the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine and the great power rivalry between the United States and China, Russia is striving to become an indispensable power, I argue, without which neither the US nor China would be able to win the system competition against each other in the future. To achieve this, Moscow seeks to build and consolidate its so-called sphere of influence based on a union between Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, which would help Moscow become a major player with significant power projection in Eastern Europe, the South Caucasus, and Eurasia. If President Putin manages to subjugate Ukraine, this would fulfill Russia's geopolitical ambitions to revive a post-imperial state as a great power with a significantly improved position in global politics. In this regard, Russia's geostrategic approach, I argue, pursues actually a vertical north-south extension of geopolitical and geoeconomic interests, encompassing the Arctic Ocean and the Barents Sea in the north, spanning its so-called near abroad in Eastern Europe and the South Caucasus, and reaching into Eurasia, the Middle East, and North Africa. The western flank of Russia, which is the eastern flank of for NATO's European members, remains one of the most important geostrategic flashpoints because of its concentration of Russia's population in this area. Russia is slowly but surely shifting its center of gravity from an interdependence with Western Europe to Eurasia, South Asia, and even the Indo-Pacific region. For this reason, the Russian president is eager to close the chapter on the sphere of influence in Eastern Europe by reshaping the European security architecture once and for all, to turn his attention to the above-mentioned geopolitical and geoeconomic areas in the long run. It is plausible that Russia needs a powerful ally after the precarious isolation by the West, while China seeks a loyal partner with regional power projection to bolster its global influence. So in this context, Russia has seized the opportunity to successfully build a new modus vivendi of systemic coordination with China in all relevant key areas of shared geopolitical and geoeconomic interests. Since 2014, Sino-Russian relations have continued to deepen under sustained US pressure and ongoing sanctions. So what is the Dragonbear? The Dragonbear is neither an alliance, nor an entente, nor a marriage of convenience, but a temporary, asymmetrical, tactical relationship in which China predominantly sets the tone, but remains dependent on Russia in many ways. While China enjoys trade, economic, and financial dominance, Russia continues to rely on defense and, in many respects, diplomatic superiority through its regional power projection and successful military operations around the globe. The unequal collaboration is cemented by the shared geopolitical interest in creating a credible counterweight to US influence and global power projection in international affairs, based on a systemic coordination of a wide range of policies, measures, and actions. Moreover, the Dragonbear is intensifying due to the common goal of responding collectively to major turbulences in the global economy, finance, and trade. But both countries keep in mind the rapidly changing strategic alliances and partnerships amidst the fourth industrial revolution. They assume that the global order is undergoing a systemic transformation, the outcome of which is unpredictable, but likely with a variety of unforeseen implications for Russian and Chinese interests. Thus, the Dragonbear is not a classic alliance according to Western ideas or concepts. Rather, China and Russia have tactically entered into a rapprochement to manage the uncertain transitional phase of what I call bifurcation of the global system, without the need to announce a strategic alliance, let alone a military one. China is evidently the stronger partner economically and financially, but it treats Russia as an equal rather than a subordinate counterpart. Mutual respect plays an exceedingly important role in this bilateral relationship, in which the two presidents have met 38 times. The relationship, as we all know, reached its culmination during the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games on February 4th, 2022 in Beijing, when the two leaders signed a joint statement of the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China on the international relations entering a new era and the global sustainable development. Russia has been China's top arms supplier for decades. Key building blocks of Russian-Chinese coordination include the delivery of S-400 air defense systems and the Su-35 fighter jets to improve Beijing's ability to attack US warships. Since 2019, Russia and China have been jointly developing China's missile defense early warning system. In addition, Moscow is supporting Beijing's military with technologies about which Russian President Putin has declined to provide further details. Russian scientists are working in Chinese technology and telecommunication companies such as Huawei. China's advanced computer chips are another way for Russia to acquire military technologies, circumventing Western sanctions. Other opportunities for cooperation, such as the joint development of satellites and the construction of a future lunar station, have also been explored and further developed. Cooperation in the area of space or the new technologies of the fourth industrial revolution are particularly problematic from the perspective of Western countries due to the growing great power competition in space. China and Russia have also settled their long-standing territorial disputes and amicably demilitarized the common border. Therefore, neither territorial claims nor border disputes should affect military relations in the long term. Although both are involved in territorial disputes, as we know, with third countries, they avoid direct confrontation with each other, following the principle not always with each other, but never against each other. In the energy sector, their interests are complementary, as Russia is the world's largest combined supplier of oil and gas, while China remains the largest energy consumer. So in the future, an energy dependency similar to the one between Russia and Europe could emerge, as Moscow increasingly supplies China with oil and gas through various pipelines and is also considering withdrawal from Europe. On the other hand, of course, energy cooperation improves Russia's profile in the Asian markets and allows it to diversify its own energy portfolio away from Europe. So obviously, Beijing needs Russia also for power projection in Eurasia, in the so-called heartland, as it is familiar to all of us from the time of the Soviet Union. The main common denominator, I argue, is not only the goal of demonstrating a credible counterweight to US global power projection. It is also about creating a significant Eurasian connectivity in response to US maritime dominance in the Indo-Pacific region, ensuring security of supply in the event of future sea lane blockages. Russia and China openly share the objective of reducing US and European influence in Eurasia. Moscow's military operation with the Collective Security Treaty Organization to efficiently stabilize the situation in Kazakhstan comes to mind. Kazakhstan is, as we know, a member of the two main regional organizations of Russia and China. Russia can be rented as a security provider, and Russian President Putin has raised the price of Russia's future engagement at the invitation of authoritarian regimes that want to remain in power following the military intervention in Kazakhstan. After his support for Syrian President Assad and Belarusian President Lukashenko, Kazakh President Tokayev is now the next leader to safeguard, to a certain extent, of course, Russian interests on the ground and beyond. Indeed, Moscow benefits from China's terrestrial expansion that connects Asia and Europe across the Eurasian landmass. The Chinese Silk Road embodies a horizontal, so obviously opposite to the vertical expansion of Russian geopolitical and geoeconomic interests. The Chinese Silk Road embodies a horizontal geopolitical extension that stretches from the least developed parts of China to Europe, diverting China's attention from Russia's Far East. The Belt and Road Initiative is accentuating the need for Russia's role in filling geopolitical gaps in those geographic points of intersection. China benefits from Russia's projection of power in the near abroad and Eurasia by securing valuable access to raw materials and offering economic and financial incentives to those countries once the situation there is stabilized, mostly by Moscow's military presence. So Moscow is emerging and this is my thesis, of course, depending on the outcome of the war against Ukraine. So if Russia is successful in Ukraine, I argue that Moscow is emerging as a global security provider that could act on behalf of China's economic interests in Eurasia in the future, but also even in other parts of the world. So the Dragonbear may have discovered a successful formula of task sharing, where Russia is the security provider, China is the financial and economic provider, that can be applied to other parts of the world. This modus vivendi of coordination extends beyond Eurasia to South Asia. As we all know, Moscow was helping Beijing stabilize Afghanistan and prevent spillover effects of terrorist activities in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan following the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. Then, of course, potential points of conflict were mentioned by a myriad of experts on China and Russia that could arise from their geographic prioritization and overlapping geopolitical interests. Russia fears of growing Chinese influence in Central Asia, the Far East, and other traditional spheres of influence in the post-Soviet space have become entrenched. However, the general hypothesis that China and Russia currently face competing interests in Central Asia, but also in India or in certain parts of Africa, and some experts even argue in the Arctic, well, this cannot be confirmed at this time. Now, what about the Dragonbear in the aftermath of Russia's war on Ukraine? China and Russia may have coordinated the timing of Moscow's launch of the re-invasion of Ukraine to take place after the Olympics. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin met on February 4th in a long-awaited effort to diplomatically boost their country's international standing, leading to the announcement of the 5,000-word joint statement. At the bilateral summit, the two presidents declared that their friendship has no limits, a quote. So the document covered broad sections of the bilateral regional international relationship between Beijing and Moscow. The joint declaration marks a turning point in the bilateral relations. I argue that Vladimir Putin would have never launched such a large-scale war against Ukraine if he had not relied on China's financial, economic, and diplomatic support afterwards. Moreover, China was apparently surprised by the Russia's military difficulties in the combat zones, and the Chinese president was even unsettled by the reputational damage that could result from the strong support for Russia, as well as the global economic consequences in light of the Russian counter-sanctions at the time when Beijing is seeking to boost its own economic growth, as we know, and as other colleagues already outlined. Obviously, China's support for Russia's economy following the Western sanctions has many dimensions, and I can not go into depth of them, but we are still about to learn. And obviously, also China will seek to convert some of the Western sanctions. China supported Russia diplomatically as well on all international platforms, and even on social media. And I would like to draw your attention to a very specific point that I think is going to increasingly become problematic, not only for an individual country, but actually for the whole family of states. And that is the problem of the commodities war. Given Russia's significant export shares of various commodities, Russia's plans may, I argue, include also an intention to wage a commodity war against the West. The country has announced that grain exports to members of the Eurasian Economic Union will be banned until August 31, with skyrocketing food and energy prices, and also the FAO food price index reaching Arab Spring levels already in December last year. Limited exports of grain, fertilizers, or other important commodities from Russia, in fact, would contribute to the further surge of these prices and, of course, to the skyrocketing inflation. This could lead to similar risk scenario of political protests and socioeconomic repercussions for a broad range of countries in Africa, Asia, Middle East, and so on. Such scenario could trigger a significant migration movement from many of these countries toward, for instance, Europe, and could also increase the pressure on the political decision makers, similarly as we witnessed in 2015-2016. So let me wrap it up regarding the scenarios. What next? Of course, Russia is, in my view, emerging as a major free rider in the global power competition between two systemic rivals. I am sticking to my scenario of bifurcation of the global system. That would mean a new kind of Cold War 2.0 scenario. I do not foresee systemic multipolarity. Regional multipolarity, of course, at the meta level of international relations is still quite obvious. Moscow does not shy away from using hard power to gain more bargaining leverage or expand its projection in geographic areas of primary interest. Russia's unrealistic demands on the NATO and the United States regarding the security architecture in Europe and its subsequent war in Ukraine show that Moscow is preparing for the long game. That means a new systemic competition. The Russian president is counting on the United States to avoid direct military involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war because of the upcoming midterm elections in November, as well as the dwindling US geopolitical interests in the old continent. With the show of force, Russia wants to demonstrate its unique geopolitical weight as an indispensable player, without which, as I said, neither United States nor China could win the competition against each other in the future. The Russian president also sees this as a significant opportunity to test the US willingness to engage in bilateral talks with Moscow and to review America's red lines for future concessions to Russia. If Washington wants Russia to break away from China's sphere of influence in the long term, the US now knows that Moscow's terms for this are the freedom to create its own much more larger sphere of influence in Europe and to dictate the future of the European security architecture. And not only to dictate it, but also to impose it on the other European powers. So obviously, there is a lot of space for coordination between Beijing and Moscow. The majority of geopolitical experts still see both of these countries as separate threats, but systemic coordination between them increasingly represents, I argue, a complex threat multiplier. Clearly, Russian President Putin is trying to capitalize on the current geopolitical competition with the United States. I viewed it as a actually three-dimensional approach, and he pursues this three-dimensional approach, namely, first, a war against Ukraine, which threatens the country's very existence as a sovereign state, and Russia's new geopolitical project of a union state with Belarus and Ukraine, but maybe even deviating towards Moldova's Transnistria and even Georgia's republics of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Second, against the European Union, which despite the most severe sanctions against Moscow, is not a real military counterweight to Russia's actions in Ukraine and is thus rendered geopolitically irrelevant. And finally, third dimension, against China and the United States, in that Moscow is significantly raising the price of Russia's future participation in the systemic rivalry between China and United States. So given the critical uncertainties, this is my final conclusion, given the critical uncertainties and unpredictable course of Russia's war against Ukraine, President Putin may turn the country into a global mercenary for China's geoeconomic interests due to increasing dependencies on the Dragonbear. So obviously it's not only asymmetrical, but it will actually increase the dependence of Russia on China. Russia's political, economic, and financial survival will depend on China amid the country's worst isolation by the West. Indeed, Vladimir Putin factored in the severe sanctions before launching the full-scale reinvasion. Currently, he has more options to diversify trade and economic ties because of the bifurcation of the global system and deepening relations with China than he did in 2014. Even as a junior partner of the Dragonbear, Russia could completely reshape the European security architecture while diverting the West's attention from China's rise in the Indo-Pacific region if it succeeds in Ukraine. However, I argue that the West's biggest miscalculation in the aftermath of Russia's war against Ukraine was not China's comprehensive actions to support Russia, but in fact India's stance towards Moscow. Evidently, India is pursuing its own geoeconomic and geopolitical interests amid the biggest recalibration of the world's order since 1945. Undeniably, the United States, in my view, needs India when confronted with the Dragonbear more than India needs the United States when confronted with China in the Indo-Pacific. Against this background, Moscow will increasingly rely on international partners by expanding its relations with Asian, but also African and Latin American countries, while India will be Russia's next most significant partner besides the Dragonbear. Russia will, however, not focus on managing its complex relations with China and India in the Indo-Pacific until Moscow has addressed its own security challenges in Europe. And this will very much depend on the outcome of the war in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Velina.